shout outs and thank yous for everyone. First, I'd like to shout out Emory and Barclay Forum, thank them for running a great tournament, and also my parents for letting me go. And second, a big shout out to the Houston Circuit, closed out this amazing tournament, very prestigious. This includes Pranav, Asher, Neelay, Brian, Raj, Abhi, Wallace, Michael, Matt, Alex, and the rest of Fantasy Cricket. Zico, also as well, one of the best teams ever. And then my biggest thanks goes out to Anson, being my mentor, being a great friend, helping me to all my debate camps and all my endeavors. Isaac for also being a great coach. Cooper, Santi, you're my best friends and the greatest of all time. All the support and everything, I love y'all. Ben and Simon, one of the best sophomore debaters ever. Great people, appreciate all the hard time y'all give me at practice. Kira, the best coach in the damn world, all the support and all the cases and all the hard losses make this worth it. I'm glad you're my coach and I'm willing to be here without you. Greatest piece of my success and I love you so much. And Zane, what can I say? Phenomenal debater, my best friend. Love you for life. Just to clarify, again, we're negating. All right. Are you ready? Yeah. We negate and observe that past projection of Maduro's outlook and funding should be disregarded, as Wilson finds from this month that the U.S. has issued a new round of sanctions on Venezuela, and the Latin Risk Report concludes that these new sanctions will have new, lasting implications for the regime's durability. Contention 1 is regime change. Currently, Maduro's regime is rapidly losing power. Specifically, Guerrero finds that January 13th, that Maduro's primary funder, China, has begun talks with Guaido. As U.S. sanctions have made Venezuela an unsafe investment, China's economic support for Maduro is rapidly diminishing. Additionally, Russia has been increasingly looking inwards, as Groh finds in 2019 that Russia's ability to finance operations in Venezuela is dwindling due to the budget concerns. And Bremer concludes in 2019 that Russia's support for Venezuela is now only rhetorical, as there is no public support for Putin to maintain funding. Absent external funding, Maduro must be able to look internally. Sanctions have constrained his ability to do so in two ways. First is gold. Delgado in 2019 explains that Maduro has turned to selling gold in order to create a direct stream of revenue that's key to him maintaining power. Rod in 2019 finds sanctions choke out Venezuela's gold industry, which is empirically proven, as Corner in 2019 furthers that because U.S. sanctions have prevented Venezuela from buying imports in cash, Maduro pays in gold, depleting gold reserves 18.5% in less than a year. Second is his inner circle. Stratford finds in 2019 that sanctions have begun to erode public support, leading to mass protests which will hurt the regime. And Rodon finds in 2019 that sanctions have constrained Maduro's ability to pay his military by cutting off overall regime revenue. Specifically, Kermev finds on January 13th, Maduro has run out of cash, and even top officials in the military only have a salary of $13. Thankfully, Sion 19 concludes that military support is the only way for Maduro to stay in power. This comes at a terrible time for Maduro, as Laura finds in January that Maduro's inner circle has begun to potentially look to Guaido regime for a more stable economic future. For these reasons, the Laura concludes that there is an 80% chance that Maduro will be out of power by the end of 2020. Sanchez in 2019 finds that as long as Maduro is in power, the IMF and other global institutions will be unwilling to cooperate with Venezuela to help their economy. However, Sarmuga in 2019 finds Guaido's already in talks with Western institutions, and Dubie in 2019 writes that the opposition plans to use financial aid from multilateral organizations and restructure their debt. Rogers finds the last time Venezuela enacted these measures, 70% of the country was lifted out of poverty. Contention 2 is reforms. Rendon finds in 2019 that U.S. sanctions were not the cause of the economic crisis in Venezuela, as Venezuela was already riddled with severe hyperinflation and significant drops in imports. The explanation is simple, as Martino finds in 2019 that all of Venezuela's ailments can be blamed on the socialist policies passed by Chavez. Socialism shifted the economy from an agrarian one to an oil state, as oil was more profitable, which caused food production to drop 75%. The government implemented price controls, which led to mass shortages. Also, spending on social programs forced the government to print more money to pay off the deficit, which skyrocketed inflation. However, the outlook is bright, as The Economist finds in 2019 that Maduro has now looked at almost every one of Chavez's socialist policies that he put in place. Bristow, however, finds that none of this liberalization is taking place officially, and this can easily be reversed. Thankfully, The Economist finds that Maduro's new liberalization has put food back on the table for millions of Venezuelans who can also afford it because of remittances. They further that these have almost single-handedly dropped inflation from 3 million% to only 13,000% in a year by putting the dollar in circulation through the wealthier, but having it trickle down to the working class. Ultimately, Lopez finds this month that these policies are set to bounce Venezuela's economy back by over 4% this year alone. The Economist concludes for every 1% increase in economic growth, there's a 0.6% decrease in poverty, which is why 2/3 of poverty reduction in the developing world has been from economic growth, which means even absent regime change, sanctions give Venezuela a chance. Affirming would destroy our progress, as The Economist in 2019 concludes that therefore sanctions have been the reason why Maduro has passed any economic reform, because they limit the regime's financial assets, forcing them to look elsewhere for revenue. Tragically, Naim finds in 2018 that Maduro's only end goal is now to pass policies that will keep him in power power, as he sees this as the only alternative to death or prison. He no longer cares about governance, and, quote, only sees the state as a protective cocoon and his last alternative to a life behind bars. Absent financial constraints, Maduro has demonstrated that socialist policies are his weapon of choice. As Powell finds in 2018 that before sanctions, Maduro and Chavez both historically used socialist economic controls as a way to quash dissent and pay off those loyal to him. And Powell furthers that Maduro found this to be a great method of power consolidation. That's what he did.
Very good.
Yeah. I'd like to also give some thank yous. The first one of them would just be like all the camps we went to, all the people that helped us, all the labs we've been in, all the coaches we've had. I came to debate. I didn't really know anything how to debate. Kara's one of the people here. I don't know if Ryan is here, but basically I've had a lot of people throughout my career help me with debate. I didn't become a good debater, but just not doing anything. They really helped me along the way. Then Houston, like, I'm not gonna go over all the names, but everyone that Ali mentioned, like, they're all literally my best friends. I go to their houses and I just like chill with them. It's not just debate. They're like literally my best friends, and they're gonna be my best friends for the rest of my life probably too. The next, I want to thank Matt as well, Matthew Fang. He's not here right now. He's home. He's house sitting. You can come to Emory, but he's been our coach. Like, I literally would not know what to do without him this year. Like, he's the reason we've had so much success, and he's the reason that we're doing good this year. And finally, all the people that we prep with, all the friends that we have, and especially the Barkley Forum Debate Tournament for holding such a great tournament. And like, we haven't had a late round. Like, it's been really enjoyable. I hope that everyone else in the future can come to this tournament, 'cause it's really just one of the best tournaments in the nation. All right, is everyone ready? We affirm our first contention is the Venezuelan crisis. United States sanctions on Venezuela contribute to the suffering of millions in 3 ways. The first is by preventing policy reform. As Venezuela faces a potential economic slump, U.S. sanctions prevented the government from correcting course to avoid a recession. Biased by the Nation 17 writes at the start of the downturn, Venezuela was on track to reform key debt practices in the economy to avoid an economic crisis. However, the imposition of sanctions on the country cut the country off investment in the international market, making it impossible for the country to roll over its debt and thus pushing Venezuela towards a crisis. Indeed, Highland 19 furthers that since 2014, sanctions have degraded Venezuela's reputation on the international market, causing numerous financial institutions to turn away from investing in Venezuelan debt. Overall, Sachs of the CEPR 19 writes that the imposition of sanctions made any stabilization program to solve the currency and import problem is impossible, as Venezuela was increasingly shut off from major markets in the dollar, locking Venezuela into an economic spiral that has caused millions to flee and live under oppressive conditions. Second, by shocking the oil industry. Zuniga, the Financial Times 19 writes that Venezuela used to mix her heavy crude with an American chemical called naphtha, making it easier for the oil to move and sell to other markets. With sanctions, Venezuela has lost access to naphtha and is assorted to cheaper, worse quality blends such as Merari 16. As a result, the oil Venezuela now sells is $17 less profitable than before. Even besides the physical quality of the oil, Stratford 19 writes that tanker companies and countries are wary of signing contracts for Venezuelan oil under the threat of U.S. sanctions and backlash. As a result, Venezuelan oil production and profits have dropped. Empirically beaten up the CEPR 19 writes that finds after the gradual decline in Venezuelan oil production, output dropped by 142,000 barrels following the introduction of U.S. oil sanctions. Crashing Venezuelan oil sales is devastating for the country, as Rodriguez's Foreign Policy 18 writes that since 95% of export revenues come from oil, sanctions cut off the government's main source of dollars and thus way to finance food and medicine. Indeed, despite increases in oil prices, Venezuelan imports still fell by 31%, and in the 2 months directly following new sanctions, food imports fell by an additional 24%. Parvaz of Think Progress 19 concludes that as time goes on, sanctions will only kill more and more people and cause millions to flee in a mass exodus, and Rodriguez concludes that sanctions risk turning the crisis into a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. Third, by blocking direct aid shipments. Although calibrated to allow aid access to Venezuela and financial interactions with internal NGOs, U.S. sanctions often impede important work in two ways. The first is through outside aid. Salama of Wall Street Journal 19 writes that the Trump administration has been very poor in delineating financial lines to allow for aid to flow through, oftentimes unintentionally blocking things such as food and medicine. Second is through blocking support for internal organizations. So Carr 19 writes that U.S. banks have been unwilling to finance humanitarian organizations, fearing fines for skirting U.S. sanctions. He concludes that although the United States has given exemptions to certain NGOs, the risk of punishment has left many smaller nonprofits within Venezuela at risk of shutdown. Because of these complications, Fox and DW19 finds that sanctions have put 300,000 people at risk of serious health complications. Our second contention is stopping Trump's re-election. David of the Miami Herald in 2019 writes that because Democrats have regained their footing in the Rust Belt, Trump must win Florida in order to win the Electoral College, concluding that no Republican has won the presidency without also winning Florida as well. USA Today in 19 writes that ending sanctions on Venezuela would jeopardize Trump's support in Florida because Trump's stance on Venezuela has been extremely popular in Florida among the Cuban, Colombian, and the Venezuelan populations, a group of more than 1.5 million voters. Forcing Trump out of office is critical for poverty reduction for two reasons. The first is climate change. Vox in 2019 writes that nearly all the Democratic candidates have extensive plans to reduce carbon emissions. This is key, as the PRI in 2019 writes that American leadership is key to reducing emissions globally by half. And the National Research Council quantifies that just a 1 degree Celsius increase will reduce crop yield by 15%, risking the lives of 2.5 billion people. Second, CBS in 2019 writes that Trump's executive orders will push 3 million people off food assistance. Thus, we are proud to refer. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll show you after. August 5th. This is the government. This is what Devin does. Same guy. Yeah. On your first argument about sanctions prevented like restructuring and reform, Venezuela was already cut out from international markets and inflation was really high. So when was Maduro ever trying to restructure his debt?
This is an assertion. Nation evidence says that he was restructuring the debt. Like they were going to finish the plan, but sanctions came in place.
Wait, so
before 2017. So in 2017, he put sanctions that blocked financial interactions. Right before that happened.
So then why did in 2014, when there was an oil shock that sent the entire country into like an economic freefall, did he not start reforming earlier?
So the argument as to why he didn't reform immediately in 2014 is pretty simple. It's the fact that Maduro, that's the onset of the crisis, so he didn't feel an overwhelming need to do things like privatization or reform restructuring the debt. We're saying that over time, as the crisis gets worse, that's his incentive. Huh?
That's the thing. Was bad in like 2016.
No, it wasn't. The beginning of recession doesn't immediately mean half the people go into poverty in the country.
Inflation was at like thousands%. Also, yes, it does because your oil argument says that most of the oil went to fund the economy. So if oil,
no. Maduro doesn't necessarily know is this going to be a 5-year recession, a 10-year recession, a 25-year recession. Yeah. We're saying that because it looked like it was going to be a long-term recession, that's when you start to restructure. But sanctions came in place.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So you said that generals right now are getting $13, right?
Yeah.
So why aren't they all just defecting?
That's our argument. Our Latin risk report evidence is very explicit in saying that by the end of this year, he's going to get out.
But they're already getting paid $13. I don't think a general.
So our Latin risk report, our second piece of Latin risk report's evidence says that 3 days ago, when Guaido was recently consolidating power, the military generals are affecting at a very high rate.
Wait. Okay. So let's talk about this, right? So
can I have a question before?
Okay.
Okay. On the re-election, in Florida specifically, the Republican challenger called the incumbent a monkey, rolled back gun legislation, and rolled back healthcare. Why isn't it a red state yet?
Why isn't it a red state?
Yeah.
The incumbent governor did what?
The incumbent governor, who was a Democrat, got called a monkey by the Republican candidate, and then the Republican candidate also passed a lot of Republican reforms.
Wait, our
so why is it not red yet?
Okay, that's a governor. Our argument is that Trump as a president. Really quickly,
Wait,
Trump as a president.
People voting for governor not vote for the president?
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying just because a person from the party, a governor from the party, isn't necessarily good, it's not necessarily indicative that they're not going to vote for
because
President
it's
Trump.
indicative of the voting patterns that exist in Florida.
No,
if Florida votes red for the governor,
if this were true, then no president would ever flip a state in the history of elections. Right? The argument
I'm not making is that there's no swing states. I'm arguing that Florida is not a swing state.
No. I'm saying that you saying that a governor race is indicative of a presidential election isn't true. Because there's been multiple times before where states have voted for a specific governor or historically voted for Democratic or Republican, but have flipped during the presidential election. The last election, right? Trump flipped multiple states that were historically blue, but because of the fact that they just liked him as a president. And our argument is that people in Venezuela currently support Trump. People in Florida currently support Trump.
All right. All right, we're going to start.
So, at the behest of Anurag and Ali, I'm going to be giving the same shout outs that Trey and Ali gave at the start. So because Ali somehow I forgot to mention to thank my parents, I'm going to thank my parents for funding this, for letting me go to debate camp. Okay, good. I want to thank my awesome coaches, specifically Anson, Kara, who does the most. Anson is like the most awesome mentor of all time. Isaac, who can't be here right now, but does something. Neo, you try. I told Ben and David, Ben Golden right there, and David Kennedy, he's in Houston right now, that if we ever made it to finals, we're gonna have to be giving thank yous. I would specifically chastise them for not doing as much work as they could. So Ben, I'm looking at you. Do better. But you're also one of my favorite people ever. I don't want to give Anurag any more time to prep, so but also, Ali forgot to thank Yvonne, so and yeah, so let's get going. When you're responding, just down there, guys. Yeah. All 5 judges? Alright, let's get started. The Ned controls the entirety of the long-term solvency for their case for 2 reasons. First, we tell you in case that if sanctions are removed, Maduro will only revert back to his old methods of power consolidation by passing oppressive economic policy as the U.S. signals that they have given up when they remove sanctions. This means that there's never any long-term solvency for poverty because Maduro's socialist policies and mismanagement and corruption will just destroy the economy again. And you haven't done anything yet. They're the only way for Venezuela's economy to rebound in the long term. So we outweigh on time frame and also we outweigh on a risk of solvency because absent sanctions, there's zero leverage and Venezuela will never change. Let's go into their specific arguments. The first one is about policy reform and debt renegotiation. There's a couple problems here. They tell you that sanctions cut Venezuela out of the international market. That's not true at all. As Bahar finds in the year 2017, that Venezuela, prior to the placement of sanctions, had already been cut out of international markets. That means that it wasn't the fault of sanctions, it was specifically the fault of Maduro for 2 reasons. The first is corruption. As creditors and international organizations know, it's not a profitable investment into Venezuela, and that Venezuela's economy and government will be unstable for a while. Plus, with the humanitarian crisis and rampant corruption going through both the government and military, restructuring is impossible. That means the only way you actually deal with the debt crisis is A, when you kick Maduro out, or B, you diversify and make it less reliant on oil, which also links into the second reason why creditors will never negotiate the debt interval without sanctions is volatility, because investors don't like investing in Venezuela before sanctions because they're a petrostate that's too reliant on a very volatile industry. When oil prices go up and down, Venezuela's entire economy changes. That means that the only way to get investment into Venezuela and to let them restructure the debt is by making the economy less dependent on oil. Additionally, Cargman finds in 2018 that debt restructuring would be nearly impossible without the assistance of large institutions. The issue is that Maduro has alienated almost all multilateral institutions such as the IMF and World Bank because of the censoring of their economic data. That means the only way they can actually do this restructuring is if they go to these bigger organizations, which only happens when you negate and push Maduro out of office. Go to their second argument about shocking the oil industry. There's a couple problems here. First, it's an independent link into our cases. Cutting off oil revenues would weaken Maduro's power and make it so countries have less incentive to hold him up because they're not as profitable. That means that Maduro has a higher chance of getting out of office. But then Rendon finds in 2019 that oil production was plummeting by millions of barrels prior to the introduction of sanctions because of a lack of economic diversity and mismanagement, so the oil sector would have gone down anyways. But then SLAP finds in December of last year that Venezuela's oil production has now doubled because it's stabilizing. That means that the sanctions obviously aren't doing much because Venezuela's oil industry is doing better and better. Going to the next argument about blocking aid. A lot of problems here. First, Raposa finds in 2019 that the only aid blocked by the U.S. are those headed for specific sanctioned individuals, not the general public. They can still access things like food and medicine. But then the Red Cross is sending in aid right now. That takes out their argument because it proves that aid is going in despite sanctions. But additionally, specifically talking about U.S. aid, well, Maduro is the one blocking the U.S. from sending in aid right now. That means that the only way aid can go in is if we get rid of him. That's corroborated by the CSIS, who writes in 2019 that Maduro holds aid to create dependency of his people onto him. That means that the only way that we get aid and imports into the Venezuelan public is getting rid of Maduro. Additionally, exemptions, they tell you that they don't work because of risk of punishments, but exemptions actually do work because they let other countries know that the U.S. is okay with shipping aid to Venezuela. Going to their next argument about stopping the election. A lot of problems here. First, Paget writes in 2019 that only 5% of Venezuelans even consider voting for Trump because Democratic politicians focus more on immigration policies. As a result, more than 1/3 of Venezuelans vote Democratic, so they're not actually solving it in any role. But then Henderson finds in 2018 that even though Venezuelan immigration has increased, it's still not enough for Trump to win Florida, especially because the Trump administration is still blocking their legal status. Latin Americans in Venezuela, in Florida, don't like how Trump's immigration policy, how they're blocking them from letting their family in and making it harder for them to get green cards and citizenships, so they're not going to vote for him. But then Grove finds in 2019 that if you buy their argument that Trump needs to win Florida, if sanctions are lifted, Trump will actually turn towards a military alternative because he had no other option to show his hardline stance on Venezuela when you lift sanctions. That means that it would kill millions of people and cause a massive refugee crisis worse than Syria that only happened when you vote for my opponents.
you see the term that you read on the first one? What was the term that you read? Did you get anything?
The terms which responses were first that already cut out. Second, all like Maduro alienated the IMF and everything, and then just like reasons why.
That's like a link.
Yeah, the link is.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, we're
Alright, so I guess I'll do the same as them and give some thank outs. Thank yous. Out. So I guess the first people I want to thank are like the coaches we've had and the people we've had like met over summer camps. I've been really great friends and it's been really good, just like great meeting everyone. Of course, thank you to everyone in Houston who's like created like it's such a great friend group that's always been supportive of each other. Matt for being like the most amazing coach ever and helping us so much. Trey, I forgot to thank his parents, so I'll thank both of our parents. Thank you for funding us and helping us get to this tournament.
My dad over there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you to Ms. Sarver, our new coach is here for helping us fight through like all the policies that our administration is like trying to prevent us from coming. Thank you to like the Barkley Forum, of course, for hosting such a great tournament. It's literally like the best run tournament I've ever been to. And then Trey, of course, for being such a great partner. It's been quite the ride. So it'll start on my case, responding to his attacks, then going to the stuff he said at the top of Wayne, and then going down his case. All right. All of the judges ready?
Yeah.
Cool. On our first contention about the Venezuelan crisis, we're going for our third point about sanctions blocking aid shipments. Our argument from the Wall Street Journal is explained as this. As a result of sanctions being implemented, financial institutions inside of the United States and banks around the world are unwilling to finance NGOs operating inside of Venezuela because they fear punishment from the United States Treasury Department. Their responses do not really respond to the argument. The first thing they say is from our Raposa evidence that it only blocks specific aid. That's exactly our argument. Our argument is the Wall Street Journal evidence that says that because these banks fear punishment from the United States sanctions, all the sanctions put on Venezuela risk losing this aid, which is why the DW evidence is very good in saying that there are 300,000 Venezuelans inside of Venezuela that are at risk of serious health complications as a result of not getting the aid. The second response they say is that the Red Cross was let in. We say our impact is unique and separate from the Red Cross. In fact, the Wall Street Journal evidence and the TOCAR evidence both take this into account and conclude that besides the Red Cross, there are still 300,000 people that need benefits. This also contradicts our next response because they say Maduro is withholding aid, but if he's letting the Red Cross in, then obviously he's not. But second, this also isn't responsive to argument because it is not about aid coming into Venezuela, it's about NGOs operating inside of Venezuela. The last thing he says is that exemptions exist and that they allow these NGOs to work. But again, the Wall Street Journal evidence frontlines this again by saying that despite their exemptions, they are still not working because they fear any kind of punishment, which is why obviously it's not working because 300,000 people are still at risk of health complications. On our second contention about stopping Trump, we'd probably agree to their defense that Trump cannot win anymore, but they agreed a response at the bottom that military intervention is going to increase. First of all, what the TS finds is that in order to militarily intervene in Venezuela, he must get Congress to approve of it. We say Congress is in zero mood to approve an intervention, so there's no chance of their impact coming true. The second thing we would say is that his incentive to intervene increases as the situation gets worse. So as long as we keep sanctions on, there's a bigger incentive for actually him to intervene and change public opinion. Let's go to his case. At the top, he reads two reasons why his case comes first. The first thing he says is that if we remove sanctions, he's going back to bad policies. If this was true, then before sanctions, we shouldn't have seen Maduro try to reform his debt. In fact, what the Nation evidence indicates is that he was about to pass a debt restructuring policy, which is going to be really important later on. But the fact that he was going to pass this policy indicates that Maduro does care about the people. He just needs the capability to do so. The second thing they say is that if we cut off oil, then we're going to create new industries. But the problem here is that you can't diversify if you have zero access to international markets. And if international investors are not coming in, providing the investment needed to actually diversify in the first place, then there is zero chance of diversification happening in a world with sanctions. Let's go to their first contention about regime change. As an overarching response, what the foreign affairs evidence writes is that change, the only type of change we'll see in Venezuela is a change of face, not policy. The reasoning is that Venezuela's ideology of socialism is so ingrained in the population that no politician would ever go against it, meaning that their impacts will not come true. It'll be the continuation of the same impact. But their links also don't make sense. Their first link is that he's using up his gold reserves. But what the IC evidence finds in 2019 is that his gold revenues, the numbers they cite, are their only official estimates. Instead, what they find is that Maduro's been creating illegal gold mines to actually increase his gold supply, which is why they find that he's increasing his gold power. So even if officially it seems like he has less gold, on the real, he's actually getting more gold. The second problem here is that we would say he's going into other ventures. For example, finding drug ventures that are also getting his revenue. On his inner circle argument, what the IC evidence in 2019 finds just a couple days ago is that now he has tankers that can move oil legally. The reasoning why this response is really important is because it concludes that even a partial revival of their oil industry through these tankers will allow Maduro to stay afloat and deflect any generals trying to deflect his regime, meaning he can stay in power even longer. But even more so, this argument is actually a good thing for us, because what we'd say is that as a result of sanctions being in place, he can use that as a scapegoat to strengthen his support, which is why the Miami Herald writes that his support has increased by 6% in just the past year. Maduro is not on his way out. If anything, sanctions are entrenching him in his power. The next response here is on their impact. On the second contention about reforms, they say Maduro is doing good things. What the Washington Post writes in 2020 is that the reforms he's doing are very paper reforms and aren't real reforms. In fact, this makes sense. Maduro does not want to divert away from his ideology. He's just trying to make it seem like he's doing real reforms, but he never will do anything in the long term. The evidence is very good about that. But even if we do see reforms, number one, we say corruption still exists, so efforts won't work in the long term. But second, they just assert that privatization and other things would be a good thing. We say privatization historically has been a bad thing for Venezuela.
You good? Yeah. All right. So let's talk about your response to foreign affairs on the top of our case.
Yeah.
You tell me that it's only a change of face. It's never going to be a change of regime in Venezuela because
No,
the ideology of socialism is so ingrained with it.
It says that there would be a change of face, but not a change of policy.
Okay. Well, my question about that is, if socialism is so vastly popular within Venezuela, why are there millions and millions of protesters that are increasing the snowball and get a higher number right now?
So first of all, that's just empirically not true. Protests are dwindling in the status quo.
We can show you
I can show you evidence that says it's dwindling. But second is that if you took a poll of every Venezuelan today, you would find a pretty high approval rating for Chavez, right?
Wait, so you're using evidence from a poll that
No, I'm just proving the point that even if Maduro himself is unpopular, his policies may not be as unpopular as he is.
So if Venezuelans vote in a president who is they already have had a vote that was made unofficial by the Maduro regime. They've already voted that we want Juan Guaido in power.
That's
and
fine.
Guaido's policies are the
Guaido's policies would eventually turn to socialism because that's what the general public actually
If
supports.
Guaido's in power, then what does the public do to change the policy? Especially if they're becoming more and more benefited.
You're misunderstanding the argument. The argument is that Guaido himself wants to stay in power once he's put into power.
When did you make that argument?
No, that's just a warrant. I mean, you're asking for more explanation beyond what I said. I mean, I read the warrant, so.
When did you say that? Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna get a question. So let's talk about your last response on aid, right?
Yep.
So you say, or actually, my bad, not that. Let's go to the bottom of your second contention, right?
Okay.
So you say Maduro is passing policies to stay in power, right? Okay. So what is the warrant for this?
What's the warrant? The warrant is that Maduro is one of the most corrupt dictators of all time. He's right now voted the most corrupt person in the Western Hemisphere. All the decisions he makes are specifically done to boost his
So
own
what has he done so far?
What has he done so far?
Yeah.
We're telling you that him privatizing right now is an action in which he's
No, but you're being very vague. You just say that privatization is happening in general. What specifically is he doing?
He's removing price controls. He's increasing the amount of dollarization. There's a lot of
Okay,
different
so
being done.
how much is food increasing? Is
We tell you
food
that it's
imports
bringing
increasing?
millions of people now have access to food where they would.
That's definitely not true.
We can show
there
you
are
that.
still food shortages in every single supermarket across Venezuela.
We're not claiming that we solve for every single issue in Venezuela. We make the crisis a whole heck of a lot better. I'm going to take a question.
Okay, sure.
So let's talk about aid. So you tell me that people fear being sanctioned when they make dealings with the United States. So the fact that even though there are exemptions, that doesn't matter, they're still not going to import aid. So my question about this is that the U.S. is explicitly saying it's okay to do this. We're not blocking this, and why are companies still afraid?
Yeah, so if that was true, then these NGOs should be perfectly fine right now, right? But they're not. The Wall Street Journal evidence says, despite the directions from the Treasury Department, they are still scared of interacting with these NGOs because they fear punishment. And I can give you examples of these banks literally denying billions of dollars to these NGOs because of those sanctions in place right now.
Okay, we have 54 seconds of crop left, and we'll start running in. It will be on our case first and then their case. All good. Yeah. Fine. On the negative case, go with the first response that they say that Maduro is never going to change from a socialist policy. 3 responses here. First, the protest and the increase of a domestic backlash means he has to force a change to decrease the amount of people protesting. Secondly, it's the only way to increase revenue. Our Bristow evidence is extremely explicit in saying that right now, Maduro's socialist policies aren't making him money. The only way to get money is him to implement market reforms. But then thirdly, I would say that in order to appease his military and his inner circle, he has to make money, he has to change his base. But then go to the second contention. They
don't let them read more responses in summary. They only read 3 in rebuttal. First, they say they're not real reforms. Yes, they are. They're working right now. They concede our economist evidence which says there's been a 4% growth. These policies are working. A is eliminated price controls. B, increased dollarization. C, allowed more privatization, which allows companies to come in and work. But then they say that corruption exists. One, this is not implicated at all. We would say corruption exists in most countries, but there's still economic growth. That's why before sanctions during the Chavez administration, there was corruption, but poverty was down 70%. Also, don't let them increase the warrant in summary. But then on liberalization, bad. One, he doesn't read a warrant in rebuttal. Don't let him read a new warrant in summary. Two, it is working, as the Economist finds again that there's a 4% increase in economic growth, which means that liberalization is actually a good thing. But third, their evidence is bad. It's about the IMF coming in and debt restructuring the international institutions. Our argument is about Maduro eliminating socialist policies. Then fourth, their evidence is from the 1990s. You prefer our evidence from 2019, which says that A, food has been granted to hundreds of millions of people and decreases the amount of shortages. With B, there's an economic growth of 4%. This is critical because if you lift sanctions, you get rid of these policies. Because remember the IEM evidence that says that Maduro's only end goal is now to pass policies that will keep him in power. So by putting sanctions on him, he is forced to diversify. Whereas if you lift sanctions, he then reverts back to his socialist policies. As Powell finds that before sanctions, Maduro both historically used socialist policies to quash dissent and control the economy, which means that sanctions are solving the problem. And that also acts as terminal defense to their entire case, because even if we lift sanctions and NGOs come in, there's still structural reforms that prevent most people from getting out of poverty. First is they can see the Rendon evidence, which says that one, there was severe hyperinflation. Two, there was drops in imports in medicine, which means that there's alternative causes to why 300,000 people are dying. They also can see the Martino evidence, which says that one, it was in an oil state, so it's very volatile, but two, food production dropped 75% before sanctions. So again, there's alt causes. Right now, we're solving for those alt causes. We're decreasing food shortages. We're helping the Venezuelan economy. We're solving in the long term. Go into their argument. On their case, go to the third argument about organizations. One, we would say that this argument is very bad because our argument is perceptual. We say that one, the Raposa evidence says this targets military, but two, the United States allows exemptions. Sure, banks might not be giving aid, but that's because of alternative causes. We say that if the United States has allowed them and only targets military general, and these NGOs are working with the people, that means that we would say that there's alternative causes for neither working in. We would say they should be going in, but that's not true. Then secondly, I would say if Maduro starts to reform and starts to decrease the amount of humanitarian crisis and starts increasing good policies, more NGOs would come in. But also, Red Cross and UNICEF were also coming in, so that isn't true. But then also, we would say that even if you lift sanctions, he would block NGOs because he wants to create dependency. That's conceded. He wants to make the people reliant on him. NGOs won't come in if you lift sanctions.
All right. Yeah, we're supposed to.
Yes. 1 second.
Let's start off on our case. Our third link about aid shipments.
Your case first?
Yeah. Is everyone good?
Who's like,
Yeah.
now?
Go to our link on aid shipments. We tell you that because sanctions put so much international scrutiny around Venezuela, NGOs and international institutions, international institutions are not able to get money to NGOs because they don't want to risk secondary sanctions to the United States. They also drop the Tokar evidence in their summary that says that because the United States is really, really poor at delineating financial lines, they unintentionally block food aid and medicine. They give a couple of responses. The first response they say is alternative causes. They say this isn't true. This is not historically true, which is generally sanctions. The evidence is very specific in saying that because even though the United States has made it very clear that the aid can come in, they're not going to take the risk. Because they know that if they do one bad thing, give money to the wrong person, or the NGO misuses the money, the United States is going to sanction them as well, which is why they've altogether cut all the money going towards Venezuela, which is why our evidence says that 300,000 people are at risk of serious health complications because of sanctions. That's the next response they say, is that the sanctions are only on the military generals. This also just generally isn't true. There's sanctions on general financial interactions with Venezuela in the first place, which is why money's not being able to which is why money's not going to Venezuela in the first place. The next thing they say is that Maduro's just going to misuse aid. okay. But then they also say that Maduro is letting the Red Cross come in. These are contradictory statements. Maduro's allowing aid to come in. The thing that's blocking it is sanctions. Which is why also our evidence is specifically saying that sanctions cost 300,000 people to lose access to medications. But also, even if this argument is true, NGOs work independently of the government. They're literally non-governmental organizations. They come in independent of what Maduro says and help the Venezuelan people. This is 100% probability. We tell you that the other case is very hypothetical. It's saying they might have these reforms, which might work in the long term, and there might be growth, which might be inclusive as well. We tell you there's 100% probability that when you vote for us, 300,000 people within Venezuela get access to food aid, get access to medicines, because NGOs are able to come in. Don't vote for a hypothetical, vote for a guarantee, which we know is going to happen. But now let's go back to their case. At the very top, we tell you from the foreign affairs evidence, it's not going to be a change of president or whatever. Not a change of regime. It's just going to be a change of face. They give a couple responses. First, to say that protests are increasing. If this were true, that we had protests before 2017, he should have reformed his policies, but he wasn't. This isn't a true argument. The next thing they say is that it's the only way for him to increase his revenue. Well, we tell you they can see the IC evidence that says that he's getting revenue from alternative sources. He doesn't need to reform the economy because the oil tankers are giving him money. The next response they say. Yeah, then they say the only way to get money is to reform the economy. Again, we say this should have happened before sanctions. The reason that's why this foreign affairs evidence is so critical is because Chavismo, the way that the government is run in the first place, is so immensely popular within Venezuela. There's not going to be actually a tangible decrease in tangible change in what Venezuela does in terms of its policy. This is why their own impact, it proves our argument true, because they say privatization happened in 2003, but then it was reversed. And the reason as to why is because in the long term, no Venezuelan president or leader can justify having these anti-socialist policies. The entire government is fundamentally socialist, but then the country is socialist. But then on their impact on reforms. They say that 4% growth is happening, which is basically the response to all our arguments. The Washington Post evidence says, and this is crucial, you should call for it, says there is zero indication that Maduro is actually going to structurally reform the economy to cause him to come out of the crisis. He is just doing paper reforms. So there might be short-term growth, but they don't show that's going to be lost in the long term or that actually solves the crisis in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So you said they privatized in 2003. When did you say that?
No, so your own evidence, your own argument is that when Venezuela made these steps before, 70% of people lived in poverty, right?
That argument is about debt restructuring, not liberalization.
You read that underneath your.
I mean, that's
No,
fine.
Rogers finds the last time Venezuela restructured debt, 70% of the country was
Okay,
That's fine. And I myself read evidence that
yeah.
says privatization existed in 2004 and it got reverted almost immediately.
The evidence we
your evidence is the last evidence, the liberalization bad that you read as the last thing you said in the
That's
rebuttal.
fine. It's the
Yeah.
same
No,
thing.
Oli,
You only
Last-
four non-responded to from.
No, Oli. The argument is that Venezuela privatized before, which is just factually true. And Venezuela did privatize before, and then it was reversed,
No.
right?
Okay.
Like the argument we're making is that
one, this is new in summary. Two,
no, it's not. It's
I
not.
literally say that Chavismo is entrenched in the population, so
yeah,
your
sure.
reforms will not last
Yeah.
long.
So our argument is that after the people see that Chavismo is not working, and
No,
they're leaving
No,
on
then that should have been true every single time Venezuela was privatized, except every single time they revert
No,
back to
because
socialism.
okay, yeah, that's wrong for a few reasons. The first is that there's never been as much opposition to Maduro as of now. People love Chavez because one, he was a great military leader. The second reason is because he was very inclined to the people's vote. Whereas
Yeah,
Maduro has
okay.
historically and like right now shown that he doesn't really care about the people, he only cares about helping himself. That's why he wants to stay in power now.
A couple of things, right? You just listed a bunch of reasons why Maduro was bad. You never listed a reason as to why socialism is bad. That's the entire argument we're making. You proved our point by saying that Chavez. No, you're saying that Chavez was supportive, right?
No.
But you give individual reasons as to why Maduro was bad.
You said Chavismo is socialism, right? It's a
Yeah.
form of socialism. Yeah. So our entire case is saying why socialism is bad. Socialism is bad.
I get
Before
that.
sanctions, Venezuela was with hyperinflation. There was a drop in imports. 75% of food
And
was
I also
declined because of
I also
food
responded to this, Oli, because before 2017, if your arguments were true, then protests and these things that you're talking about should have caused Maduro to privatize and
He
liberalize.
was. That's why you said he was going to the IMF.
No.
No, that's from a long time ago. That's from
No,
like
debt, like we just agreed, debt restructuring is
No.
not privatization.
In rebuttal, you said
Yeah.
in 2017. Remember
He was
that's
dead
your
set.
case.
He was
Yeah,
in-
on your
okay.
on your
Wait,
first
wait,
argument
we're
about
just
policy,
going
on your
Okay.
first argument about policy reforms, you said that in 2017 Maduro was going to debt
No,
restructure.
again, we agreed earlier in this
just
crossfire
agreed.
that debt restructuring is not the same thing as privatization. Like you don't
Yeah,
have to
sure.
spin
I'm
the
just saying
argument.
that he's caring about the economy.
Yeah, it's
No,
going to
and
reverse
I'm saying it's
back
two
to
fundamentally
2016.
different things to restructure your debt and switch away from an economic system of socialism, which has been used in Venezuela since the
I mean, that's what
1940s,
arguments
then
are.
go to
Arguments are
privatization.
they both have
You can
very-
take a question.
they have
You can
one-
take a question.
Okay.
Oh wait. Wait.
We have time. I thought you said.
Wait, all right. Let's go to your argument about blocking aid. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, I don't understand your reason why like banks like still fear.
So there's two things. It's just like when companies and financial institutions give money to NGOs, even like they know that even the small risk that that NGO misuses the money, or they give the money to the wrong person, or there's some some incorrection that happens with the money being sent, they in the United States, they're going to face repercussions in the United States. That threat is enough for them to just give zero money to Venezuelan NGOs.
Which is what's happening.
We're going to be on our case first. Is everybody ready?
No.
Sorry. Let me know when. By far, the easiest place to vote in this round is our second argument about reforms. Remember the argument that sanctions specifically cut out Maduro's revenue and make it so his regime is threatened. That forces him to liberalize the economy and revoke socialist policies, which helps the Venezuelan economy. They make a couple of responses. The first one they said is from the foreign affairs evidence that his ideology is really ingrained. However, they concede all of Ali's front lines in summary. Remember that he tells you that the people right now are anti-Maduro, which means that they want to change and they supported Guaido's policies when they voted for him. Additionally, the reason why is because they're benefited by these policies. That's why food is going in right now. Additionally, Maduro is going to privatize, remove socialist policies because he specifically needs the money. He's going to enact it either way. Then they make this new argument that they reverse privatization and reversing reforms in 2003. First of all, that was new in second summary. But second of all, the sanctions were not in place in 2003. Realize that sanctions make it so these policy removals cannot be reversed. They can't be put back on because they make it so the only way that the regime can make money is if they privatize. Go on to our argument. The other response that they make is from the Washington Post telling you that their paper reforms, but their evidence is outdated as the Economist evidence from late 2019-5 that these reforms have already been passed and are projected to increase the Venezuelan economy by 4%. That gives us access to the entirety of our link. Realize that right now we're privatizing the economy, price controls are being lifted, and dollarization is happening. All of these things, all of these socialist policies that are supposed to limit production and exports are being revoked right now. Our evidence is insanely explicit. It's from The Economist, and I urge you to call for it. Because of this, we're seeing food go to the table of millions of Venezuelans. There's a 4% increase in growth, and a 1% increase in growth leads to a 0.6% decrease in poverty. The weighing here is really simple. Remember, on the probability debate, they tell you the reforms aren't happening right now, but we tell you that they specifically are. Additionally, we are way on time frame because it's the long-term solution. Now go to their case. Realize that they concede a couple of responses. First, they concede the CSIS evidence that says in 2019 that Maduro withholds aid from the people to create dependency on them for him. So we must get there's never going to be any aid that happens if you vote for them. Realize that that's 100% conceded, which means it takes out their argument. Then on this idea about exemptions, remember that exemptions actually work because they left the US, other countries of the U.S. is okay with them shipping aid. Additionally, if a reform happens, it leads to more NGOs operating within Venezuela because they see that it's more profitable.
Foreign affairs response that Atreya reads at the top of their case is really important. What the foreign affairs indicates is that Chavismo, which is essentially socialism, is so ingrained in the Venezuelan population that even if there is regime change, and even if they win their entire case, there will not be a change of policy in the long term. It'll be the exact same policy. The way you know my evidence is right over theirs is because historically this has been true. Every single time Venezuela has tried to privatize, there has always been a following of socialism recovering. The reasoning is that people like socialism in Venezuela, and it's always been the method, which is why politicians always go to it. The only response we get is that people are anti-Maduro. This literally does not respond to the argument. Even if Maduro is removed, and even if a new politician gets put back, the same policies that caused the crisis to exist will still come back. They have no long-term impact. You are getting nothing in the long term when you vote for them. The second response that doesn't get responded to well is the Washington Post evidence from the bottom of their case. Their only response is that their Economist evidence post-exit. I'm pretty sure 2020 is later than 2019 because our evidence, number one, is more recent, but number two, analyzes every single reform they talk about and concludes that there is no indication Maduro actually wants to do this for the long term, but rather he's only doing the reforms to appease the international sector and just make it seem like he's reforming when in reality he has no intention of A, keeping those policies intact for the future, or B, following through on real policies that can make it better in the future. At the end of the day, one thing is clear about their argument, and that is that it's zero long-term solvency. There's zero chance that in the long term the economy actually gets improved rather than it's just a short-term bump and economic growth. Let's go to our argument about aid. The only response we get extended and final focus is the CSI evidence that says Maduro is withholding aid. First of all, he contradicts himself multiple times in the round when he says after he was withdrawing aid, later he let in the Red Cross. Obviously, he's willing to do this. But second, it's not even responsive to our argument. Our argument is not about aid shipments coming in. It's about NGOs that are being financially restricted by U.S. institutions right now. That means that even if he is or isn't letting in aid, regardless, these NGOs inside of Venezuela cannot do their operations because they cannot get their funding from U.S. banks. The reason why our contention is really important is on probability. You know, as soon as you affirm in today's run and remove sanctions, 300,000 people are saved that are at risk of serious health complications. Whereas on their side, there are so many hoops we have to get through. We don't know when the regime is going to end, when these policies, and whether those policies are a good thing. But you do know 300,000 people can be saved tomorrow.